Welcome back. Now, Eskom has ramped up load shedding to stage 3 until 4 p.m. this afternoon. And thereafter, it's going to be stage 5 load shedding, which will be implemented until 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Now, last week, Electricity Minister Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa assured the nation that his department is hard at work to ensure that load shedding levels are brought down this winter. The minister embarked on a 2-week diagnostic visit to 18 power stations across the country. And Dr. Ramokgopa joins us now virtually to talk about the state of our electricity supply in the country. Dr. Ramokgopa, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina, and morning to the viewers of Morning Live. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Minister, you know, it's the first time we've spoken since your appointment as Minister of Electricity, so very belated congratulations. It's over a month now. But also, you know, one of the things that I've been wanting to ask you is about your actual mandate, given that the supply of electricity at the moment, as it sits, you know, straddles two other portfolios, which is, of course, public enterprises and the Department of Energy. So what exactly is your mandate and how are you meant to achieve it?
No, thank you very much, Sakina. I think it's a fair question. So if you listen to the remarks of the president when he made the changes to the executive, he did indicate that the ministers of electricity's mandate is to bring down the levels of load shedding, both the intensity and regularity. And he goes further to say that he will be reassigning responsibilities as he sees fit on what is it that will be required from a legal mandate to make sure that the Minister of Electricity does have the necessary legal instruments to make the kind of interventions that are required. So the expectations was that once we do this preliminary assessment of what the state of the electricity ecosystem looks like, we will be in a position to make a proposal to the president, and he'll apply his mind on what he deems fit to be the assignments from a legal point of view that can be given to the Minister of Electricity. But you're absolutely correct. I think there are a number of players in the ecosystem. The first one is Department of Public Enterprises. You know, that is a shareholder representative, essentially looking after the interest of the shareholder across multiple SOE, including Eskom. And then there's also the Minister of DMRE, Mineral Resources and Energy. That's from a policy perspective. And the interface of the DMRE with Eskom really is at the level of the integrated resource plan, because part of the generation capacity in the integrated resource plan has to do with the Eskom fleet, primarily your coal-fired power stations and also the nuclear. So I think his mandate really ends there, and also opening the multiple bid windows. And the expectation is that once the preferred bidders have been identified, then they get to enter into a power purchase agreement with the Eskom. So the DMRE's mandate really is limited to that extent. Just the custodian of the integrated resource plan, the opening up of the multiple bid windows, and then Eskom comes in at the level of signing the power purchase agreement to give effect to that generation, so that it can get access onto the Eskom grid. And then there are other players that are there lacking, if you like, on the margins. The Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment is a key player in the ecosystem, in that she's a custodian of, if you like, the environmental legislation in the country. And you know that the first fossil fuels are some of the biggest polluters in the country. And we have seen how she has played a role when she provided the exemptions to Kusile, to allow Kusile to have a temporary arrangement to bring back the 3 units that have been out of operation for some time. So she applied that exemption, given the powers that are vested in her in terms of the environmental legislation. And then there's a fourth player in the system, is the Minister of Finance. That's important in the light of the constraints on the Eskom balance sheet. And you have noticed that when he tabled the budget, a significant part of the announcements in the budget speech was the fiscal relief that is being given to Eskom. But then it places conditions, and some of those conditions have to do with the fact that Eskom can't participate in a new generation. If it does that, it will require the explicit, if you like, approval of the Minister of Finance. So essentially, it's confined to refurbishment of the existing fleet and also the maintenance of the infrastructure, both generation, transmission and distribution. So yes, I think there are those multiple players. But what we sought to do at the introduction of the office, I had had significant engagement with my peers, the four that I've mentioned, on a one-to-one basis, so that as the president will be making that pronouncement, there's an appreciation we have to be working together. And I must say that Minister Gordhan has played an important part in the exercise of going to visit the power station, just as an illustration of a joined-up government. At every state power station that I visited, I was joined by senior, if you like, officials from the Department of Environment. And I think there's a common appreciation of what needs to be done. And also just an exchange of some of the research work that had been commissioned by DPE, so that I am able to, if you like, situate myself in this new position, have an appreciation of what are some of the studies that have been conducted before, so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel, because the introduction of the Minister of Electricity should not in any way suggest that it is the start of government's effort to end load shedding, but essentially it's a ramp up, an escalation on the part of government to attempt to resolve the load shedding question. But the long and short of the answer to the question is that the president will now make that determination, and will give him the space to make that determination. And I'm confident that in that determination, the president will make it possible for the Minister of Electricity to be sufficiently empowered to make the kind of interventions that are required. And also just to say, these interventions, Sakina, are not necessarily Eskom-centric. What do I mean by that? I mean is that the solutions are not necessarily sitting exclusively with Eskom. Eskom is a dominant player on the generation side. Eskom is a monopoly on the transmission and the distribution side. Of course, municipalities do get to redistribute. But remember that we have liberalized the generation, in that we have removed the cap on embedded generation. The multiple bid windows have brought on board the significant players in the renewable energy space. So there are those players who must also contribute towards generation, so that we are able to resolve the energy crisis in the country. So Eskom is significant in that instance, in that even if you have new players on the generation side, Eskom is still a monopoly on the transmission side. So Eskom is indispensable to the resolution of this challenge. And then there are demand side interventions, really, that have to do with if you like, the habits of you and I and many of the viewers here. It has to do with the kind of technology that exists in the market to make it possible for us to bring down demand, so that we're able to close the gap between generation and demand. So that's the if you like, the
long
ecosystem.
Of it.
Yes.
Dr. Ramokgopa, so from what you've just explained, would I be correct to say that the president appointed you as Minister of Electricity, but essentially you have no scope of the work that is expected of you? As we speak, you don't have any KPIs in place that say these are the outputs that you need to meet as the Minister of Electricity.
No, I do have. I remember when I started the question, I said two things. The first one is to reduce the intensity of load shedding. So essentially moving it from higher stages of load shedding to lower stages of load shedding.
Okay, let's start with that one. Let's start with that one.
Where you have a point is that the determination has not been made to say that over this period you must bring back down the level of load shedding to stage X or stage Y. And part of the reason is important that, and I do welcome this conversation, is because you need to understand the status of the grid. And the past 2 days is a perfect example of the status of the grid. What do I mean by that, Sakina? Yesterday, I think morning until 5 or so, we didn't have load shedding. And then tomorrow or later today, we're ramping it up to stage 5. So you can see the oscillation. So it's the unpredictability of the grid. So, I mean, the next question I suppose you are going to ask me, how do you move from 0 to 5? You move from 0 to 5 because as I'm speaking to you now, I'm sure there's likelihood that there's a unit that is tripping. The studies that has been done, commissioned by Minister Godan, suggest that at the 18-19, when that study were conducted, we were experiencing on average 6 trips a day. And what the trips do is to take out on average 600 megawatts. So essentially there's 3,600 megawatts that goes out every day. Of course, we are linearizing them. It doesn't necessarily follow that day. It's
Fair
every
enough.
day. But it's just to make the point. And then it has been illustrated that in the space of 48 hours, essentially you are going to have a energy deficit of about 5,000 megawatts, because one stage of load shedding represents 1,000 megawatts. And of course, the other part can explain that during the long weekend, we can make a case that the demand is low because the period of the peaks, essentially the crest, or if you like, is not as pronounced because we don't take the intensity of how we use energy in the morning is not the same as we prepare for work and all of that, because some people
Dr.
wake
Ramokgopa.
up late. And so those are the details that it's an appreciation of the instability of the grid. And that's why it's important that you needed to conduct this assessment and go to the president, not necessarily prescribing what your key performance indicators should be, but just to state this is the state of the grid. And
So,
when we took time
let's go to that, Dr.
press
Ramokgopa.
conference.
Dr. Ramokgopa,
Yes.
apologies for interjecting, but we do have, a time pressure.
That's fine.
So I'm just trying to get to a few other things. So you undertook that 2-week diagnostic visit to the 18 power stations across the country. And explain to us, in terms of your diagnosis of the state of those particular power stations, how that informs what we are going through today.
Well, first is the point I make. The grid, the generation capacity is unstable. I've made reference to the fact that there are trips that are happening on a daily basis. Those trips happen because we have underinvested in the maintenance of these assets. So there's 81 units that are producing about 44,000 megawatts in the country. Just the coal fleet, and of course there's a 980 megawatts that's generated by Quebec. Of course, the one unit is out. In total is about 1,900 megawatts. So the first finding is that because of underinvestment as a result on the constraints on the Eskom balance sheet, so the units are going out, what we call unplanned capability load factor. So essentially, units are going out unannounced.
Minister,
and these are going out because we haven't been investing in the maintenance of those assets.
To that point,
and that's the kind of challenge that is, yes.
To that point, given Eskom's balance sheet and what they tell us they have spent on maintenance over the years, knowing that Medupi and Kusile have come in at over 300 billion rand, cost overruns are massive. So what do you mean there's an underinvestment in these stations? How is that possible, given the money that Eskom is spending?
No, that's possible. So let's isolate Medupi and Kusile. They contribute 9,600 megawatts, just shy of 20% of the installed capacity. So that, of course, those are your latest, the youngest units. So the core, the backbone of your power stations, so that's the remaining 12 power stations. They are the ones that are underperforming. Of course, Kusile has got its problems that are well documented, where there's about 3 units that are out as a result of that failure that had to do with the chimney, and as a result of the exemption that the Minister of Environment has given to Kusile. Those are projected to come back by The last one will come back by the 24th of December. So you go to a number of units. For an example, if you go to Hendrina, it's got installed. It's got about 10 units generating at average of 200 megawatts. So you need to be getting out of Hendrina about 2,000 megawatts. 4 of those units have been discontinued, so they are not in operation anymore. Not necessarily decommissioned, but they are not in operation anymore. And the remaining 6 units also continue to trip because we have not refurbished, we have not, if you like, introduced modern components to help us to go and have an appreciation of what are the root causes of failure as and when these units do fail.
So why hasn't that been done? Have you been able to establish why that hasn't been done over the years?
I just made the point that there hasn't been a maintenance in those power stations. So that's the long and short of it. And part of the report that I'm presenting to Cabinet, of course, I did expand in detail when we did that elaborate press conference, is to make proposals to Cabinet on what is possible going into the future. So what is possible going into
But Dr. Ramokgopa,
there has to be...
Dr. Ramokgopa, it's a simple question. You know, when you have not done what you're supposed to do at a particular power station, the question has to be asked why it wasn't done. And there has to be a reason for. We can't just say we haven't done it and, you know, that's it, we move on. There has to be a reason as to why it wasn't done, and people have to take accountability for that.
I'm trying to explain to you that there has been significant underinvestment. There's been constraint on the Eskom balance sheet. And that's why when the Minister of Finance introduced that fiscal support of 254 billion rands, the condition is that there has to be a significant amount of Eskom investment that goes into maintenance. So if you look at the historical trend, is that a significant proportion of Eskom's revenues were directed towards defraying the cost associated with raising money in the debt capital market. So that has been some degree of relief. So you have to invest money into these power stations. And we are making proposals on what needs to happen when you make these investments in these power stations. We have categorized the kind of investments that needs to be made, and we are computing the kind of money that is required for us to make that investment. And it could be the case that even with the kind of fiscal relief that is being given to Eskom, Eskom will not be able to undertake the kind of maintenance that is required from a capital investment point of view. So you need to look at the other resources to ensure that you are able to refurbish the plant. Otherwise, you'll not be able to get out of the load shedding problem. So we are sitting with that historic legacy of underinvestment. So we are here, we are proposing solutions on how you can make these investments going into the future. And we don't discount the fact that you might need additional fiscal support, but that fiscal support must be directed to this unit, and that unit should not be general. And what
to what extent, Dr. Ramokgopa, we are out of time, but I want to know, to what extent did corruption play a role in the underinvestment that took place at these power stations?
So let's go to Kusile. So we know for a fact that the kind of design failures that we are experiencing, the technical challenges that are there in Kusile and Medupi, as management put it, you can connect it to the corruption that took place during the of the power station. You've got premature fail component. When in Medupi one unit failed and then they want to fix that unit, they find that there's wrong material that is not from the original equipment manufacturer. So there are those things that you can see there's a direct correlation on those two newer power stations. On the older power stations, we know that part of the outage sleep, so essentially the inability of management to get back the units into operation at the time that they had committed to bring them back, has to do with the procurement issues in the various power stations, because I want to procure from Ramokgopa and so and so, and I don't opportunity to
Minister?
others. And we were able to demonstrate that there's a connection between those inefficiencies and in some
apologize,
instances,
Minister. We unfortunately are out of time, but I want to invite you to come into studio so that we can have more time, really dedicate more time to understanding the diagnosis that you came up with in those 2 weeks. And of course, the plan going forward.
I've offered that to you before.
Please, we'll take you up on that right after this.
I'll come, like for real, I think we need
We
that
are
time
going
so
to, we'll have this conversation off air because we desperately need to take a break. Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, Electricity Minister, speaking to us there. We'll ask him to come into studio and spend more time on this conversation.